Okay, I think we're rolling. Thank you for being here, and welcome to our very first live interview on our channel, Phroneo, with Father Moses McPherson. And Father Moses, welcome. It is very kind of you to agree to join us, and without too much. Too much introduction, I will just say that we agreed to talk about fasting because that is of the primary interest to our channel, and that's what we want to talk about. But we will see where the conversation leads us. This is a live, so to speak, developing conversation, and let's see what interests both of us, and we'll just take it from there. So. Once again, thank you for being here. And my question to you, number one, is about how you came to Orthodoxy, and more specifically, you came as an adult. What ascetical practices were you aware of, or did you actually practice before you became Orthodox? Was it anything from your previous tradition, or more specifically, was there any form of fasting that you practiced before you became Orthodox?
Yeah, Father, thank you for having me on. It's my joy. I deeply appreciate all the research and the work that you've done. It's been incredibly helpful to me over the years. And so it was great when you asked me to come on. I felt like I was returning the favor. So you did me the first favor. So thank you for having me. Yeah, my wife and I came to Orthodoxy in our mid-20s. We were in college up in Canada at Redeemer University. And oddly enough, we had a classmate who had taken the class previously before we took this class called Light from the Christian East, Eastern Orthodoxy and Early Church History. So we actually visited an Orthodox church with her. I think it was a year or so before we actually took the class. And we went to a Serbian church, and we went in the basement afterwards, and it was Lent, and we were eating soup, and they had a bar, and they were serving beer, and you could buy beer for like $1 or $2. And I was like, this is an amazing church. I'm like, we need to incorporate more of this into Protestantism. And so a year went by, and then we took the class, and then that's where kind of all the dots started to connect for me. Probably the single most There were probably two very profound aspects of the class. Number one is realizing that the church didn't have the Bible for 300 years. I was already seeing in Protestantism within my own university the disconnect between the university professors and their various theologies. And I was a philosophy and religion double major. And so I was seeing all of the relativism that was happening in philosophy, the postmodernism, and then just realizing that Protestantism was basically postmodern in the fact that it was totally relativistic. The professors couldn't agree on things, or couldn't agree on quote unquote the basics, or even what the basics were. That idea is not even a biblical concept. And so we took the class, and two big things stuck out to me, or maybe three big things stuck out to me. Number one was that the church didn't have the Bible, that it just had the church for like 300 years. And that completely reshapes your view of authority. I think the main question in all religious contexts of Christianity is, who's your authority? And that had a profound impact on me, seeing that there was not an authoritative position from the church that was solely scriptura. And number two was reading the life of Saint Seraphim of Sarov. And I read his life, and what I did was I read his conversation with Motovilov. And that had kind of innumerable impact on me. Just seeing the understanding of the light that's shining out of him. And I was realizing there's nothing like this in Protestantism. And I was somewhat familiar with Catholic saints at the time. And I was like, there's nothing like this in Catholicism. But everything about the story just struck me as being true. There did not seem to be any falsehood in it or any kind of grandiosity. And even the fact that they found the conversation after Motovilov's repose, all of that was very impactful for me. And then number 3 was that I had been introduced to what's called centering prayer. It's a Catholic practice by one of my university professors. And I started to realize it's so strange that we're Protestant, but we're reading Catholic books on prayer because we don't really have any Protestant sources on prayer. And I read a Catholic book on the different spiritual disciplines. I can't remember the name now. It's been, almost 20 years. Been 20 years, pretty much. But I remember reading all about the ascetical practices and how they affect and change you. And I was in such need of spiritual help. I was so beat down on life, and it was all the byproduct of my own decisions, and some of which were not my own decisions, childhood and family and all those other things. But I was realizing in Protestantism that there was nothing tangible. There was no kind of way to actuate your faith. And so when I'm reading this Catholic author and they're talking about that fasting changes the soul, that long prayers, all these different things that it was talking about, I was like, man, there's something tangible that you can do to help heal yourself or help heal your soul or kind of get you in touch with God. And so, I think I did 1 or 2 all-day fasts, just nothing but water at the time. And obviously I'm like looking if there's going to be a change from doing an all-day fast, whatever else. But it led into obviously orthodoxy and then seeing the ascetical practice of the Orthodox Church. And one of the things that stood out to me was the whole idea of obedience, that it was not the fasting in and of itself. It wasn't the diet, but it was the obedience that brought the grace of God. So all of these things started to kind of click and come together. So I wouldn't say I had much of an ascetical background at all in Protestantism because there's nothing really tangible in Protestantism. If you get into a jam, it's like read a book or read your Bible or say some prayers, but there's no written prayers. The prayers are, once you say everything you need to say to God, it's like a couple minutes at most, because you go, you just don't sit there and talk for 30 minutes. It doesn't work like that. So there wasn't anything structured in Protestantism that was tangible. And then in discovering Orthodoxy, it was like everything was tangible. The fasting schedule, the prayers, the liturgy, it was all very systematic and directed. So I didn't have much of a background with asceticism prior to Orthodoxy. And then I started to make my way into the Orthodox Church. So I know that you wanted to ask about what was my first impression of fasting, which was it took us a little over a year to become Orthodox. I had a lot of, obviously with being a religion major, I had a lot of theological questions. I had spent a lot of time studying on my own prior to university. So I had gone to L'Abri, which was a place instituted by Francis Schaeffer. I had worked with a little bit with a group called Stand to Reason, which is an apologetics group out of Southern California. I had listened to a lot of apologetics lectures and debates. So I was working through all these questions to try to figure out Orthodox answers to Protestant questions, which obviously is kind of a losing game because you start to realize like the church fathers weren't Protestant and they were working out of a completely different paradigm. And I started to realize, that Catholicism and Protestantism were just two sides of the same theological coin. Protestantism was a response to Catholic heresy, and it was its own heresy, and the church really didn't have anything to do with it. And so as we made our way in, we left university, went back to Southern California. The closest church to us was a Greek church. And at the same time that I joined the church, I was going through a lot of changes in my life, a lot of changes spiritually. There was a whole period of time where I stopped all alcohol, was trying to get, help for coming out of the depression that I was in. All of these different things were going on simultaneously. So when we entered the church, our priest actually was pretty lax in terms of fasting. I think he kind of understood where I was at. Like, I was a pretty rough case. People don't understand, but like, even now I meet people and I tell them, I'm like, you're in much better condition than I was when I joined the church. Like, I was not in good shape mentally, spiritually. I was a train wreck. And so he worked a lot with me and kind of just said, look, just be obedient to what I'm telling you to do. And so I followed his instructions. And at the same time, I was reading some Orthodox authors, some saints, and they were emphasizing, look, it's not how you fast. You do whatever your spiritual father tells you to do, and that brings the grace of God. It's the obedience. And so I was following his instruction, but it wasn't very ascetical. But it was all part and parcel of starting to have a prayer rule and starting to go to liturgy. And I was diligent about going to liturgy every week. Our church didn't, I mean, I worked Saturdays, but our church didn't even have Vespers on Saturday night. But I was diligent about going to church. I followed his instructions to fasting. And then, you know, we were Orthodox for about 3 years and a little less. And in whatever way, shape, or form, God seemed to open all the doors in a miraculous fashion for us to go to seminary. And it was when I went to seminary that I had a spiritual father who was a hieromonk there at St. Tikhon's. And he's like, okay, now we're going to start fasting. And so then we kicked it up a notch. We didn't go full value, but we kicked it up a lot. And he's like, look, this is what you need to do. And so that was when I really started fasting. Funny enough, you know, 2.5 years or so into being in the faith, where I really started to get more serious about fasting. Now,
you know, it's very interesting. You said a big influence on you was reading about Saint Seraphim, and it just reminded me that I'm not sure if we talked about it before, but I was not raised Orthodox myself. I was born and raised in Russia, but of course that was during the Soviet Union, and my ancestors were Orthodox. But by the time I was born and growing up, Orthodoxy just wasn't really, in a very literal sense, it just wasn't available in a city of 600, close to 700,000 people. We only had one single chapel at the city cemetery. There were no churches. Everything had been destroyed by the communists. So when I was coming to Orthodoxy, one of the encounters I had was with the life of Saint Sergius of Radonezh, and it was something very similar. When I read it, it was eye-opening, and I told my wife at the time, I said, you know, if what this book talks about, if this is even partially true, we have to be Orthodox. There's just no other way around it, because these are such powerful examples. But would you say that the important focus for you, at least at the beginning, hopefully you can maybe speak to it, how it is for you now, that the important focus is not so much whether it's fasting as an isolated discipline or prayer as an isolated discipline, but a life of discipline in general, a life of routine and discipline, certain times for prayer, certain times for fasting. Now, how you do your prayer and how you do your fasting is perhaps secondary to the primary purpose of having a discipline. Is that something you think you would kind of say that was the main thing in your beginning?
I would say the main thing in the beginning was trying to find God. I felt like I couldn't find him. I couldn't locate him. And when I started, you know, it's again, I believe by divine providence, but I basically got 2 books from this monastery. And one was Saint Silouan the Athonite, and the other one was the original book on Saint Joseph the Hesychast, written by Elder Joseph of Vatopedi. And I was reading these books and realizing I need to say the Jesus prayer. I think I need to say the Jesus prayer to help heal my soul. And I'll tell you this, I had the routine, and I don't even remember if it was given to me by the priest or by the abbess of the monastery, my spiritual mother. but it was to say 33 Jesus prayers, like every morning. And I remember that I would sit on the edge of my bed that was on the floor at the time. I was married at the time, but we had no bed frame, right? We were just 4 post-college kids. And I would sit on the edge of that bed and I would do 33 Jesus prayers. And every single one felt like I was pulling a tooth out of my mouth. And if I went a whole day today without any food, it would be less ascetical than those 33 Jesus prayers when I started. The 33 Jesus prayers were so painful to get through every day for me. It was unbelievable. It was almost unbearable to do 33 Jesus prayers. That's the state I was in spiritually. It wasn't like going through mud. It was like torture. And I would just sit there and I would do 33. I remember I'd finish and I would jump up and I'd be like, okay, I'm done. I did my rule. And then I would get on with my day. But I started to find that if I missed a day or I didn't do them right away or whatever, my whole day was off. My whole mood was off. Everything seemed wrong. I could not get my bearing. So everything that was instilled in me from the very beginning was prayer is the primary work and purpose.
And you did that as soon as you woke up. Is that correct? Or
yeah, it was like right when I got up. Knowing me, I probably got up and fiddle farted around for a bit and then whatever, and then forced myself to sit down and do it. But yeah, it was my morning prayer. Right, that was every day. 33 Jesus prayers. And obviously over time it grew, exponentially, but I can't overemphasize how difficult that was for me. And so at that point, I didn't understand the total incorporation of the body and the power of fasting and the way that the fasting can help and drive things along. But at the very least, I understood everything was about trying to make contact with God, just on a very basic human level, just trying to find him. I felt like I couldn't find him. In fact, that was one of the things that stood out to me. And I don't say this lightly, but I do believe it was the Holy Spirit nudging me when I first encountered Orthodoxy, that somehow I correlated. And then again, I don't believe this was my rationale. I believe this was by the Holy Spirit. I drew a correlation in the gospel to the blind men who were yelling at Christ, Son of David, have mercy on us. And I go, man, they were like yelling at him and they got him to heal them. And I was in such a bad shape. I just thought, if I can just get his attention, maybe he can heal what's wrong in my soul. That was the only thing that I thought at the time. I had such a profound sense of the darkness in my own soul. I had such a profound sense. It was not human. I understand now it was not human. It was not just my conscience. It was my conscience in that sense, but it was, I had come to Protestantism from a very rough, bad childhood and background and grew up, did a lot of bad things. And I just felt like there was just a darkness that was always in my soul, like a sludge. And no matter how much people said, well, you're forgiven, you're covered by the blood of Jesus, I would say, yeah, I know that, but I don't feel that way on the inside. On the inside, there's something wrong with me. There's like a darkness in my heart. And I don't think a lot of people could understand it because they were fairly normal people. They hadn't been where I had been. They hadn't done the things that I had done. And so I don't know if they really got that. So when I came to the faith, and I was reading like about confession, which is, I believe, ascetical in and of itself, I was like, I have to do confession. I've got to get all this stuff out of me. I'm like, I have to tell the priest everything that I've done in my life. And, now it's interesting because I meet people who come to the church and they're like so intimidated by the life confession. They're like, oh, I don't know. It's so heavy, Father, this or that or whatever. I go, do it when you're ready. I don't push people, that's just not my style. I go, do it when you're ready, whatever else. But for me, I was like running towards it. Mm-hmm. It's like, I got to get the healing. I have to get the healing. I have to find the healing in my soul. There's something wrong with me. And so that's where it really all started, was just following the very basic instructions of my priest, and working on the very serious sins in my life, like my problem with alcohol and drugs. At that point, I really wasn't doing drugs, but it was all correlated. You know, it was all the same numbing process.
So that in and of itself is a form of fasting when you, of course,
Yes.
abstain from something. Yes.
Yes.
So you're talking about prayer. You're talking about fasting, confession. How did that progress in the first, say, 5 or so years
Yeah.
of you kind of getting deeper into orthodoxy? What kind of a progression was it?
You know, it almost was like 0 to 100 once I went to seminary. It wasn't quite 0, but I can't even remember what my fasting rule is when I was new. It wasn't much. I mean, I think that there was a few things that he had me fast from, maybe dairy and eggs or something like that, or maybe he had me, I just can't even remember what it was at the time, you know, but it wasn't much. But he said, you know, cut out this or cut out that on fast days. And, you know, I think I mean, I don't want to scandalize anybody, but I think I still ate meat, you know. I hope that doesn't scandalize people, but, you know, you get what you get when you get into the church with whatever. But anyways, it's not how I do things now, but it was what was given to me at the time, and I was obedient to it. You know, if I was told not to eat dairy on Wednesdays and Fridays, I didn't eat dairy. But yeah, when I went to seminary and I met the hieromonk was like, we need to kick it up a lot. You know, you can eat some fish, but you need to kick it up a lot. You know, you're in seminary now, blah, 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 blah. And so that really started, I think, more than anything, what I think one of the aspects that I would say that is so profound about fasting, which is it's the obedience. It's not the food in and of itself. It's just being obedient to somebody else's will or the church's will or your spiritual father's will and not doing your own will.
Mm-hmm,
and,
mm-hmm.
You know, doing your own will causes havoc in your life. At least it did for me. It caused a lot of problems in my life doing my own will. And so I started to just take it very seriously. I started experimenting a bit. I went overboard a few times, as we tend to do when we're young and healthy and zealous, and we have some energy. And I started to realize that doing too much fasting didn't increase my prayers. You know, it didn't help me pray more. There was kind of like it's kind of like weightlifting. I could push myself to do a very, very crazy workout, but I won't recover in time for the next workout.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends up being detrimental. So you can't go all gas and no brakes. You got to be somewhere in between. You've got to have a high RPM, but not go into the red. And so, yeah, I put myself in the red a few times and then realized I just couldn't function. I would be falling asleep all over the place. I wasn't able to really do my Jesus prayer with any concentration. I was, you know, lethargic and not doing well physically. And I realized, okay, this doesn't really help me to pray more, but I can subject myself to it because, frankly, I have a strong constitution physically. I just do. It's just genetics. It's, you know, it's just that's just genetics. I have a strong constitution. So I realized that somewhere in between of kind of being fasting, but within reason, made a lot of sense and worked. And then you know, I share this because I think it's helpful. I heard someone come to the seminary and speak on St. Paisios, and they talked about how St. Paisios would only eat within certain windows of time, and he wouldn't snack or do anything in between. He would control his eating. And so then I started to incorporate that. I started just eating when I had set times when I was supposed to start eating.
Almost like intermittent fasting.
Oh, I've been intermittent fasting for probably 15 years or more, at least.
Mm-hmm.
At least 15 years-ish or so. And then that was the other thing that I realized over time was like, I realized I really didn't need to eat breakfast. It didn't really, you know, so there was a period in seminary where I'd always eat breakfast, and then I would cut off my eating at a certain time at night. And then I started realizing, you know, I don't really need breakfast. It kind of slows you down. So I found, like, you know, you can kind of push out your morning to a bit and still get your calories in and everything you need, and just do it in 2 or 3 meals later on in the day.
What's your opinion on coffee in the morning?
I don't drink coffee at all. I don't drink coffee at all. Well, it historically, coffee has put me to sleep.
Okay.
So when I drink coffee, I love I love the taste of coffee, and sometimes I'll go up real high, but then I crash and fall asleep. People don't understand.
So how
Yeah.
is your morning? Is it tea? Is it I don't know, glass of water, or
Usually,
what do you do?
usually it's some kind of caffeine source. I mean, sometimes it's energy drinks. I'm trying to get away from them because I know they're terrible for you. But to be honest, that I do drink energy drinks, or I used to do like energy shots that were just, vitamins and some caffeine in them.
Okay.
Um, and so that would kind of get me going in the morning.
Okay.
Some sort of, it just depends on the time because, as I've gotten older, I don't even drink a lot of caffeine right now because I've been sleeping so well. I don't do a lot of caffeine. I'm a naturally very energetic person. That's like my natural constitution. If you meet my kids, they have a lot of energy. It's just something. It's something. If you meet my mom is like in her. I think she's almost 80 now or so. I think she's 79. But my mom is like 2-3 cups of coffee in the morning, but she's like 90 miles an hour all day long. So there's a constitutional, huh?
It's genetic.
It's genetic. Yeah. When I was in high school, I mean, I would, sleep 8 hours a night and wake up wide awake, no matter what I had done the night before. No matter if I was up till 3 a.m. or whatever, or doing anything crazy or whatever, I would sleep 8 hours and wake up, and my friends would still be asleep for like hours, and I'd just be putzing around.
Well, so now you have I think to say a growing parish is to really understate what is happening in your parish. You have a lot of people coming in, and the other day I saw another post online somewhere. You had 11 more catechumens, and I think that's probably quite common for you to see people just coming in and inquiring, becoming catechumens, and some of them at least, and I hear it's a large number of people becoming Orthodox. So with your experience, with all these practical things, of course, becoming Orthodox is not just about, fasting and prayer rules and things like that, whether it's coffee or energy drinks. I mean, there's a lot more to it. But there is the practical aspect, of course, is also present. And so with all of your experience, the things that, you've gone in the red a few times, all the RPMs and things like that, you learned to moderate these things. How do you counsel the new converts about just the basic day-to-day things that they can do to maybe organize their life around some of these Christian ascetic disciplines?
That's a great question. So normally when I have someone come to the church, I like them to come for at least a month, consistently before they even become a catechumen. Now, 20 years ago when I came to the church, somebody would visit, they knew nothing about Orthodoxy. Now I have people who come and they're like, Father, I had a guy last Sunday came and he's like, I've been watching your videos for a year and a half. So people are at a completely different phase of life. Like for people today don't understand. 20 years ago, it was like, you didn't have a whole bunch of books in English even. You had some books that had been translated into English, but it wasn't what we have today. And the availability of books or even icons was much, much less than it is now. But not only that, people would come and they would know nothing about Orthodoxy. Somehow somebody would tell them or whatever. The church that I was part of, we had 2 catechumen, me and my wife. And then eventually we got a 3rd catechumen. And it was like, man, that's a lot of catechumen in the church. 3 catechumen in a year, that's like crazy. The church is growing like nuts right now. Now it's like, I've had unbelievable amounts of people coming who are coming and they're like, Father, I've been studying this for 6 months. And I'm ready to become Orthodox. And I always tell them, and they're like, and I love the liturgy. I came today, it's my first liturgy. How do I join the church? And I always tell them, just come for a month. Just come for a month. If you want a prayer book, we'll give you a prayer book. I don't talk to them at all about fasting or anything. If you want a prayer book, I'll give you a prayer book. We've been, I don't know how many of those Jordanville prayer books we've given away in the last year, but it's a lot. And I just say, hey, just come to the services, et cetera, and then we'll talk. And so when they become a catechumen and they ask me about fasting, I have some videos on nutritional aspects of fasting, and most people today are pretty well understand nutritional basics on some level. But I tell them, look, just try to start following the calendar. Just start trying to follow the calendar and what's on the calendar. And again, I think some of that is my personality, which is just kind of jump in and you'll learn how to swim. So I'd rather have somebody trying to fast and trying to do it and falling, as it were, falling and learning that process during their catechumenate. We don't really ever baptize anybody who's not been to church for at least a year straight. And some people it's more than a year. But I would rather have them learning how to fast and kind of figuring it out along that journey, because there's too many people and you can't micromanage people. They've got to figure it out for themselves. And you got to let the Holy Spirit work with them as well. So what I do is I tell them, hey, just now, if they have a certain dietary requirement or they have an autoimmune disease, then we'll sit and talk about, okay, what can we do? What can we not do? How can we work with this? And I tell them that, just make sure to ask questions if you're not understanding it. But I notice most people are fine. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. Most people are fine when you say, look, if you become a catechumen, you're going to be doing morning and evening prayers. Let's talk about how much you're going to pray each day. What's realistic? A mother who comes to the church with 4 kids is not a, single military guy in his mid-20s. There's just 2 different stages of life and responsibility.
Well, so what's your approach to, say, the age differences, the younger people, children versus teenagers versus maybe older people or even elderly people? Do you try to adjust the different, I don't want to say requirements, but expectations for different kinds of people just based on where they are in life?
Yeah, so with the kids, I tell the parents, like, we start fasting at 7. That's the norm. But I'm like, you have to kind of figure out who the kid is. Do they have allergies? So many kids today have allergies. So you have a huge problem with that. And then 2, you want the participation of the children and you don't want to breed resentment. So somebody who's bringing a 5-year-old to the church, there's no fasting, and then they're going to have 2 years to prepare. Somebody who's bringing a 9-year-old to the church, I'm like, you got to kind of figure out as the parent how they should fast. I talk to them about the basics, but I also tell them, look, this is what my kids do, but all my kids have been in the church since their birth. And they're in an environment where we're fasting anyway. So it's different for what they've been through, as opposed to bringing a 9 or 10-year-old or 11-year-old boy into the church and then saying, okay, now you're vegan for half the year or whatever. That's a different dynamic. So I'm like, you got to see what they can do. You've got to work with them. You've got to work with their allergies. And then you got to make sure that they're doing okay and they're not becoming resentful, So I err on the side of, like, trust the parents to kind of figure that out and kind of guide and develop them. Now, by, let's say, 16, if they've been in the church for a few years, even maybe before that, they should really be keeping the fast, But again, it's the difference between somebody who's been raised in the church where their parents fast and the environment, and they've been around the church for umpteen years, and somebody who's bringing their family and trying to convert. That's a different dynamic. And the number one thing that I tell them is, like, don't burn them out on it. Because if you burn them out on, they become resentful, they're going to boomerang back the other direction. That's what people do. If you push them too hard, they're gonna slingshot back. You're fasting voluntarily and becoming Orthodox for this reason. They're kind of along for the ride. But a lot of times the children love the church. Like, that's never been a problem. Right. Adults are much harder than children. But incorporating the dietary requirements, that's up to the parent.
Let me ask you a little more specifically about the Eucharistic fast. So what is your recommendation to parents whose children are preparing for communion, but maybe they're not really fasting at other times, Great Lent or whatever other longer fast, but they're preparing for communion, and now they're faced with the question of the Eucharistic fast. What would you say to those parents?
Well, two things. Like, one is I try to emphasize with the parents, at least try to get them accustomed to not eating meat. So they can eat eggs, they can do dairy, ease them in if you're going to, because they're young and it's what you're kind of subjecting them to. So do something that is manageable for them. And then as far as the Eucharistic fast goes, again, it kind of starts at 7, but then I get some people who say, well, my kid's getting sick because they're so depleted from not eating anything. Can we do just some bread and a cup of water in the morning? And it's like, yeah, if the kid is getting sick because they haven't eaten for, half of the day, because our liturgies, with how many people we're communing and the fact that we're one priest, I mean, sometimes our liturgy is going to 11:45 or noon. And so I'm like, a little Zapivka after communion isn't enough to bring their blood sugar back up and everything else. They're too fatigued, they're too wore out. Now there's a balance between them being hyperactive and then too wore out. But I just try to say, give them something really simple in the morning, bread and water. If a woman is pregnant, I don't give her any instructions, obviously. If they're under 7 years old, I don't give them any instruction, because they're kiddos. Most of the time anyways, you're so rushed to get out of the house on Sunday morning, you're giving your kids something simplistic to eat anyways.
So how many people are you communing on an average Sunday?
Well, we recently, and I think it's gonna jump again, but recently we've been probably communing like 90-ish plus. Depends.
That's
so
a good number.
So like when you're doing a homily that's 20 minutes, and then you're doing communion that's like 25 minutes or so. I mean, it's, you can't really commune more than 1 to 2 people a minute, like you're going as fast as you can, and you're trying not to be rushed, because you still want to say the words that are legible, and you have to do it in a way that's not, this isn't fast food. It's not a conveyor belt. So yeah, so we're kind of dealing with that right now.
Okay. Well,
so
let me
on the time to the service. That's why the service ends up being long.
Let me pivot just a little bit, and of course, I can't help myself but to ask you about your physical training, because you are well known for being very fit, shall I say, and lifting very heavy weights regularly and a lot. How is your fasting discipline maybe informed by your physical training, or the other way around? How's your physical training maybe affected by the church fasting discipline? Do you have to modify one or the other, or both? Do you have to somehow?
So I'll give you two things. One is the aesthetics, right? So at the longer fast, let's just talk about Great Lent because that makes it easy. In the longer fast, I'm normally under 20% body fat, probably closer to 18% body fat, although nobody on the internet believes this, but it is actually true. They're always like, you look like a bowling ball, or like, Father, you're out of shape. I'm like, I'm much fitter than you realize when I'm not wearing a cassock. But let's just say I'm under 20% body fat, in that 18 range. I always notice, no matter what, my body fat goes up during the fast. It's more composition than it is weight. My weight doesn't really go up or down so much as I just look fluffier. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't spend time flexing in the mirror. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not interested in this stuff. But, you get out of the, you're brushing your teeth at night. You look in the mirror, you can see kind of where you're at. It's good to just, it is one thing I would emphasize to young men is like, don't spend time looking in the mirror. You look in the mirror for a few seconds or whatever, get a sense of where things are at and move on. Don't spend a bunch of time looking. That stuff is weird. Flexing in the mirror, doing all that stuff, it's weird. It's narcissistic. You don't want to spend a lot of time looking at yourself in the mirror. I don't even like lifting weights. I have no mirrors in my gym. And if I have to go to a gym for some reason to lift weights, I don't even like looking in the mirror. It's strange. It's for a human to look at themselves. It creates a kind of third person perspective that I think is unhealthy. So number one is I don't spend time looking in the mirror, but I noticed aesthetically, I look fluffier. I don't have as much lean muscle per se. Now, I power lift and I do some strongman competitions. The main thing that I track is performance. And I can say this, your performance does not even really drop off for 4 or 5 weeks of keeping a vegan diet. It really doesn't. So like if you're benching, I'm going to just use a round number, but if you're bench pressing 400 pounds, you're not losing 20% of your strength. At 4 or 5 weeks into the fast, you're maybe losing 5% at most. I don't even think you lose even 10% of your strength. I don't think I've ever tracked it and had that happen.
And of course you compete. Most people don't compete, so it's even less of a concern.
It's even less, but people are always like, oh, I'm going to get weaker. And I'm like, you're not going to get weaker. It's just not, it's not a reality. If you're watching your diet in a systematic way and just paying attention to it, you know, in a general way, like I don't count calories. I got kids, and that's just not me. It's just, I don't want to exercise to have a restrictive diet. I exercise so I can eat like a normal person. I eat higher protein than the average person. Obviously, I need to eat more calories because of my workouts are very grueling, but I'm not a chicken and rice guy, 5 meals a day, whatever, bodybuilder diet. I think that stuff is, I don't want to live like that. I'm already married. Why do I need to live like that? I don't need a six pack. I don't need to be 10% body fat. I mean, it's not necessary. So the thing that I would say is that I just notice that you'll have more fatigue 4 or 5 weeks into the fast. It's actually, the way that I see it is it's kind of really coming into Holy Week is when you actually start to kind of experience a little bit of physical tapering off. And then you go into Holy Week and you have it's very hard to lift weights during Holy Week as a priest because you have so many services. You're at the church pretty much every single day, morning and night. And a lot of times I just stay there during the day. So it's hard to get even workouts in during Holy Week. And plus, if you hit it hard, which I've done on Holy Saturday or something, you're thrashed for the Paschal liturgy afterwards. You know, like if I normally would work out on a Friday, and then obviously it's Holy Friday, I'm not lifting weights on Holy Friday. Let's say I push it to Holy Saturday, I go hog wild because that's all I know how to do. Then I go to serve Pascha. Now I'm like exhausted and my back is hurting and whatever else. So I've just realized like you got to take some days off. But then immediately on Sunday, when you break the fast and you go to lift weights on Monday, you're basically right back where you started at the beginning of the fast. So even that small decline in strength is not, it's not significant. People, I think they get in their head, and I'm like, if you actually track your numbers, like let's say somebody says, oh, I can bench 225 for 10 reps at the beginning of Great Lent. Maybe on week 4 or 5, maybe you do 8 or 9 reps. That's not like you've not lost anything of your core strength. So you're not going to look as good, but that's because you're not eating animal products. That's just reality.
So you mentioned protein, and we had a conversation previous to this about the protein supplements. Would you talk a little bit about the protein supplements, maybe the ones that you think are good to take outside of fast, the ones that maybe are good to take during the longer fasts, for people who need extra protein or more than they can get from, say, a fasting diet?
Yeah, so the 3 things that I've recommended previously are caffeine. So you're going to feel more fatigue, just general fatigue during the fast. So make sure to take some caffeine before you work out. It helps a lot. Doing some kind of pre-workout that isn't going to keep you up all night, whatever else, is very helpful. Number 2 is creatine. Everyone should take creatine year-round, both men and women. 5 grams a day if you're not athletic and not really working out. 10 grams a day is totally fine. I would say creatine, because creatine, is synthetic, but it's naturally occurring in red meat. Taking a creatine supplement during Holy Lent is a huge help. It's a huge help. Creatine basically is an amino acid that keeps your cells packed with water. So it helps tremendously with recovery, and it helps tremendously with just giving your body that kind of nutrient that it's missing. Other than that, I do vitamin D because, like most people, from my blood work, I have a vitamin D deficiency. I try to do fish oils. I don't think taking a fish oil during the fast is breaking the fast in some way. And you don't taste fish. You're not eating fish. You're just getting your body some basic nutrients that it needs. I probably need to do a multivitamin every day. I have a whole pack of multivitamins here on my desk. Good luck with me taking those every day. But creatine, I'm very adamant about. And then when it comes to protein, here's my caveat. And I think this is important, which is if you take a lot, there's two things. There are certain vegan proteins that are absolutely detrimental to your body. You will take them and they will have an adverse effect on you physically, okay? You will feel it, like you will experience it. There's something, my gut sense is your body doesn't lie to you. So if you take something and it makes you feel funky or you don't want to drink it again, that's your body telling you that there's something toxic with it, right? So for instance, there was a study done on some vegan proteins, and they were saying that they had abnormally high amounts of glyphosate because they were spraying the crops with glyphosate. Right. But I've noticed that certain vegan proteins that I've purchased, if I took them for 2 or 3 days, it was like my body did not want me to drink the shake. And that's not normal because I've never experienced that with whey protein ever, or animal-based product protein ever. So there's something going on. I don't know what it is. I know that this is going to sound very bro science-ish, but I'm okay with that. I'm not afraid of bro science. It usually is accurate. So I recommend trying to find a vegan protein that is good and clean. The problem becomes some of these vegan proteins are like twice the price or more than just getting a whey protein. They're expensive. Like so you think that's not really keeping with the spirit of the fast if you're spending an extra $100 on protein every month. And there's been periods, quite frankly, where I have been absolutely dirt poor, like very, very, very poor. And with kids, and I'm like, I don't have an extra $100 a month to spend on vegan protein. So an alternative to that is to do whey, which I think you need to talk to your spiritual father about, or a whey isolate. A whey isolate takes the lactose out of the whey, so it doesn't really taste like dairy. So, but it's important to find something that's clean and that you can drink consistently. So I do a lot of vegan shakes during the fast. My wife knows this. Anybody who knows me knows this. I am a creature of convenience. I am not pre-cooking all my meals for the week. I'm not cooking shrimp 3 times a day. And even the shrimp today, like you're not supposed to eat the shrimp a ton because they say there's problems with the shrimp or the tuna or whatever, So we're in a little bit of a conundrum that I don't think we've really addressed, which is a lot of the food today is very toxic.
We're going to mention that in just a minute, but I do have to agree with you. The idea of taking a supplement for the longest time, I have felt personally, and I'm just speaking for myself here, not for any broader kind of concept applicable to other people, but just for myself. Supplement is not a food. So you might cook a roast lamb to break a fast on a feast day, but a protein shake because you need extra protein due to your lifestyle, that isn't a feast. That isn't a way to have a festal meal and to break the fast and to enjoy a celebration. That's essentially akin to medicine in my mind. So if you need to take a medicine, you don't really go into this great, exploration whether the little capsule has what is it, animal byproduct that creates this gelatin or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's medicine. It's whatever it is that you is necessary for you to function. So that's just my 2 cents about it.
Yeah, I think also like one of the things that I would say about the fasting, which is all fasting, all nutrients are broken down right into protein, carbs, and fat. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you have to work with. So if you get into the fast and you're like, oh, well, we shouldn't be eating whey or we should be doing this, I go, you have two options. You're either going to eat more carbs or you're going to eat more fat. And either way, you're going to get fatter. That's it. So if you go,
or you're not going to eat, and then you're just
not
going to be able
to
to function quite as well.
And then you're not going to be able to function. Yeah. So my protein intake is I shoot for 200 grams of protein every day. I'm 235 pounds or so. So I need at least 200 grams a day just for muscle recovery and whatever else. I think if you look at some of the stuff that gets demonized by the media over time, it usually is proven wrong.
Well, so, what do you think about the different lifestyles that people live? We sort of lump everybody into, we all fast, but, some people work in a cubicle and, it's a pretty sedentary lifestyle. Other people are roofers and they're working out on the roof, either in the cold or the heat or, any number of other circumstances in between as well. What do you think about the different approaches to fasting when it comes to just different lifestyles?
Yeah, so the way that I understand it in the Russian tradition is that there's a little more laxity on fish days when it's not Great Lent or Dormition. Mm-hmm. And so let's say like a couple of years ago where I was working outside, I was a roof salesman. The church started to grow. There were some dynamics at the roofing company, and I was very amicably let go. I got a severance check and all my commissions paid out, and they just said, I was kind of their top guy, and they were going through some changes, and so we parted ways very amicably. So I started running my construction business at the time, and it'd be over 100 here in Texas, and you'd be jackhammering or building a deck or a fence. You're out in the sun, and some of the times I'd have guys working with me that were Orthodox, and we'd be working we'd be taking a lunch at 11 a.m. or whatever. That's when I usually eat my first meal, and I'd be like, what are we going to eat for lunch? You know what I mean? It's like if it wasn't a strict fast day, it was like, boys, let's go get a tuna sandwich because I can tell everybody's falling out physically anyways. You can't do 3 hours outdoors of hard labor and not be absolutely stymied. And if you go eat a vegetable lunch, the productivity for the rest of the day and the way that you feel is not going to be great. So in Russian times, one of the reasons that they ate shrimp was because it was cheap, easy dock worker food. And I have a friend of mine, he's a priest, his wife is from Maine, and they're godparents to one of my kids. Her dad grew up in Maine back in the 1950s, 60s, whatever. And he says all the poor kids at lunch would eat lobster and all the rich kids would eat hamburgers.
That's right.
So historically, lobster and shrimp were very cheap and accessible and plentiful. And the reality is it's hard to find some place that serves shrimp all the time, and that you're not paying a huge premium for it either. And then lobster is obviously pretty much out of the question with my budget, so I don't even consider it to be a viable thing. And then a lot of the mussels today, I think, are just actually ground up fish or something as well. They're not actually real mussels, or like you have to buy real mussels, but then there's whatever. So anyways, the availability of food factors into the fact that historically food that was available was part of how people got protein. If you were a dock worker and you could get cheap, easy shrimp every day that was fresh right from the sea, that was good. This was not farm-raised shrimp from across the world. And the availability of it obviously is not what it used to be, and to get enough protein in a single serving. So I would say that I try to balance what's life and practical, because if you get to the point where you're not able to do your job, and you're falling out physically, and you're getting paid for your work, you got to kind of figure out what you're going to do. I've done it.
Right.
I think that's the point where you need to talk to your priest, your spiritual father, and like, hey, what should I be doing? And making sure that he understands, like, this is my lifestyle. This is what I have to do physically every single day. A lot of priests don't even work physical jobs and never have worked physical jobs. I mean, doing a 10-hour day on a job site or even a 9-hour day on a job site is like, it's rough. I mean, that's a rough day. And then I would still come home and lift weights afterwards. Like you're drinking so much water. You're not even, you're just drinking water and just sweating it out all day long.
That's right.
It's very, very taxing.
You mentioned shrimp, and on my Substack channel and in the posts I've had a discussion or attempted to have a discussion, and hopefully it will eventually develop into something a little more meaningful with more answers and questions. But so far it's just a lot of questions. I was looking at the shrimp at our local grocery store here in upstate New York, and the shrimp comes from Thailand. Well, it's farm raised, first of all, so who knows how it's raised and whether it's even any good for you. And then the very fact that it had to be brought all the way from Thailand, which is on the opposite side of the globe. And it's not the only example. I mean, we're talking about olive oil. I mentioned to you before about olive oil. The closest source of olive oil to upstate New York is California, which is across an entire continent. And other oils come from, I don't know, Greece, Italy, or some other place. And it's just so the question that I've been struggling with a little bit and trying to explore and maybe get some opinions on that is we live in a type of connected world that we can bring shrimp from Thailand, and we can bring olive oil from California all the way to upstate New York or to Canada or anywhere we want. The question is, should we? Because shrimp brought from Thailand is really very, very expensive. Olive oil, if you find very good olive oil, and apparently not all of it is even very good, it's mixed with all kinds of stuff, and but if you find good olive oil, it too is very expensive. Plus the environmental impact on trucking it, halfway around the continent or all the way around the continent. And that seems to be contrary to the spirit of fasting, at least when you read the church fathers, John Chrysostom notably. Food is supposed to be very simple. It's supposed to be cheap. You're supposed to be saving money and taking the saved money and giving it to the poor. Well, that's not happening if you're buying shrimp at $25 a pound.
If your budget is spiking during the fast, you're not giving that money to the poor.
Something is wrong. So what do you have an opinion on how fasting should be approached based on where you are, whether you're in Canada, upstate New York, Texas, California, the Mediterranean? Should there be a difference, or should we all try to just follow the Typicon the way it's written? And of course, that's a Mediterranean creation. So what do you think?
Well, I think there's two considerations to piggyback on what you're saying. Number one is, if you've ever been in a monastery with monks, they have a very long day, but their actual work day is more like 6 hours or so. They have services in the morning, then they work for 3 hours-ish or so afterwards, and then they have lunch, then they work for 3 hours just afterwards, then they get ready, then they have evening services, then they have their prayer rule. So cumulatively, they have a very long day, but it's not a very physically vigorous day. It's just not. That day is not equivalent to 9 hours of building a fence in Texas in the summer. It's not. It's just not. I mean, I worked for the monks at St. Ticon's. They were wonderful. Abbot Sergius was great about helping me get work when I didn't have any money. But I realized, I'd work for like 3 hours. They go, hey, now we're eating. I'm like, really? And then we'd eat, and then it was like, hey, we're going to work for 3 hours, and then we're going to get ready for Vespers or whatever, vigil. They did vigil every day. So it was like, that was not what I was used to working construction. When I worked construction when I was younger, I started out in the trades when I was 18, and basically on and off worked in the trades or physical work for 15 years or more, easily. More than that, even. So I've done a lot of physical labor in my life. But, when I started in plumbing at 18, you got to the job site at 7 a.m. and you did not leave the job site till 3:30 at the earliest. And when I roofed on commercial roofing, you would be at the shop at 7 a.m. and we would not get back to the shop till 5 p.m. It's a 10-hour day. So obviously, when you're young, living on peanut butter and jelly is more feasible, and doing other things and maybe supplementing. But the truth is, too, what you even said is, when you're in your 30s and doing physical labor, it's a lot different than when you're in your 20s. And the other thing is too, some of this also pertains to your constitution, right? I've worked with enough people, and forgive me, but my accomplishments, they're just a hobby in powerlifting. Obviously, I'm a total genetic outlier. I'm not your, it's a huge amount of it is just genetics. It's what you're given. And I know, I used to think, oh, everybody will just do this, if they work out for this amount of time. And I've been training guys now for the last few years. They come to they work out at my house in my home gym with me, a couple of my godsons and inquirers or catechumens. And I realized over time, look, everyone has a different genetic potential. It's very, very clear to me that not everyone is built the same. They're just not. Some people are just flat out more genetically gifted than other people. So that's one thing that you have to take into account. So a 10-hour workday for me maybe was not a 10-hour workday for other guys, and I could see that, or even what they could accomplish in a day. I'm not saying I was the hardest working guy, but I always try to put out a good effort and, do hard things, Like when I commercial roofed, I was in charge of roping materials onto the roof a lot of times, because I had been weightlifting all during seminary and whatever else, and I naturally have a good constitution. So truthfully, lifting heavier stuff was easier for me, That's one thing. The other thing to keep in mind, and I think this is equal importance, which is they did a study on the nutrients within our food. And I can't remember what the exact was, but it was something like 5 heads of lettuce today are equal in nutrients to 1 head of lettuce 100 years ago, because our soil is so depleted. So our food is more toxic because it has more chemicals and more pesticides, and the earth is so depleted that the nutrient content of the food that we're eating is less than what it used to be. The other thing is, if you ever get bread from a real baker who does ancient grains, the quality of that bread and the satiety of that bread is totally different than buying store-bought bread. There was a period of time when I was in Northern California, and we actually had this guy, I didn't even know it, but I stumbled on him at the farmer's market, who was world famous for baking bread. And he did all ancient grains. He milled it all. I actually went out to his house, saw his whole baking operation. He had these French ovens that made this bread and da-da-da-da-da. But the bread was like, you would have no gluten response to it. It was more satiating, more filling than other bread. So not just the quantities of what we're eating, but the nutrient content and the quality of the food is vastly different. And the lifestyle of a lay person in their work and in their day is radically different than amongst day to day. So I say all that because I do think that's part of the conversation. Now, as far as following the Typicon, I basically just follow the Typicon because I'm not spiritual enough and wise enough to go against that. I follow the Typicon. That's what I do. I tell my spiritual children to do that. Again, given if they don't have any autoimmune problems or this or that or the other, which has become more frequent. I've seen it become more frequent in my priesthood just over the last 12 years. More people are realizing that some of the food that they're eating is what's making them sick. So you have to work with people where they're at. But I do think it's part of the bigger conversation that I think it behooves the church to have at some point to understand how the Typicon matches with monastic life versus the life of a lay person, and also those considerations of nutrient density food, the distance of food, the toxicity of food, and then obviously the availability of food. I think that's a conversation that's very, very, very reasonable.
I hope we will have it one day. Yes, I sure hope we will be able to have it one day. Well, what do you think the main purpose of fasting actually is? We're talking about fasting, but all the different, foods and techniques and maybe some kind of hacks too. But what's the purpose of it all?
I think it's is it Saint Nicetas in the Philokalia where he talks about fasting? He gives all these quotes on fasting, and he basically says, fasting is the leaves on the tree but every tree that doesn't bear fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. He says the fruit of fasting, the leaves just provide the shade to cultivate the fruit. And he says the fruit is prayer of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So fasting is just a means to kind of temper our body and to put it in the right place so that we're able to pray. That is by far, I believe, the most accurate understanding from the fathers. The second one is the obedience factor, that you're having to do something that you wouldn't normally or voluntarily do on your own. And we know that Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden because they broke the fast. But the fathers say when they were in the garden, the soul ruled over the body. And when they fell, the body ruled over the soul. And so there is something about reversing that to where you're telling your body, listen, I know you want to eat XYZ, but we're not going to do that. And for reference about fasting during Great Lent, I always tell people it's not meat. Your body doesn't crave meat. You know, if you're 4 or 5 weeks into the fast, as a person who trains and competes, I go, if you offer me fish, it's like, if you offer me like chicken breast, it's like whatever. It's like, what does your body want? Your body wants red meat, and it wants something fatty. It wants the fat that is in the red meat. That's what your body's actually. Because if you put a chicken plate of chicken in front of somebody, it's like it's just chicken. But if you put a steak in front of them, it's like, oh my goodness, like I can't even look at it. You know what I mean? Because that's what your body's actually craving. And I think part of that is that your brain is craving those fats that it has to have for its brain energy, you know? So that being said, I think that I think we need to pay attention to what's going on, that we're not getting the fats that we need during the fast that are not quality fats. We're getting fats in our processed food and other places, but they're not actually quality fats. They're not what our body is actually wanting to have. And it's easy though to say, well, my body's craving carbs or my body's craving fats, and then to go overboard on it. So
right, we're not really in tune with the body for the most part, and we crave something, we just don't always know what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always red meat. I'm like,
right,
and I tell other guys, I go, what do you want? You want a Chick-fil-A or you want In-N-Out burger? It's like, dude, I want In-N-Out burger.
Yeah,
you know, I don't want Chick-fil-A.
You mentioned Adam and Eve. Of course, that's a joke, but that came to mind. It was all about an apple, you know, and fruits are allowed during Lent.
That's good. Yeah. So I think the obedience one is very helpful, especially for men. I think as men, in particular, we need structure and discipline. And one of the things that gets us in a lot of trouble as men is doing our own will. And it's very helpful, I notice, for young men in particular, to have something that says, I'm going to do this for God. I'm going to sacrifice my food for God. I'm going to subject my body to this for God, and et cetera, et cetera. So that I think is very beneficial. But we can never forget the fact that, look, the purpose of lightening our body during the fast, it's healthy to lose a couple pounds during the fast. It's not good to gain a couple pounds during the fast. Mm-hmm. So we should have a little bit more lightness or something that's missing physically that we need to fill with the spiritual life and with prayers. And again, that's one of the things that the fathers talk about, which is during the fast, those are a couple of their precepts. One which you spoke about, which is we should be giving greater alms. We should be attending church services more frequently, meaning we should be devoted to greater prayer. Ideally, we should be trying to increase our prayer life during the fast, so that we're actually utilizing what is happening physically, because, you know, we're psychosomatic beings. Our soul and body is knit together.
Hopefully there's less time that we spend shopping and cooking, and so we have a little bit of extra time to devote to other things like prayer.
And it's interesting too, because like during the fast, people are like, man, it's harder to eat during the fast than normal, because there's, you know, they have to cook everything from scratch. And especially if you're feeding a whole family, you know, I have 5 kids, like the workload doesn't necessarily decrease during the fast because you still got to get everybody fed. But now the accessibility is not that you can heat something up. Like you can't go to the store and buy a lasagna or whatever else. Like you've got to make a lasagna from scratch. It's all vegan or something, or you've got to do this or that. So sometimes I think sometimes people end up spending more time cooking during the fast, because look, a life in the world today, you can't just eat a bowl of soup for breakfast or for lunch or whatever, and then sit in front of a computer and do heavy intellectual work. And I don't mean intellectually in terms of academic, but when I was selling roofs, it was like you'd be working on a contract in the afternoon for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. You need to be mentally sharp to do that. You can't be nodding off at your desk, which I've been guilty of, and unfocused and fuzzy, because you're producing something for your employer. That I think factors into it as well. Your employer is not paying you to fast.
So what do you what would be your recommendation, your advice to those who are trying to establish the fasting discipline in their life? Maybe not exactly from zero, not from scratch, but they've tried a couple of different things. Maybe they have a calendar, church calendar, or whatever. Have you discovered any practical things that might be helpful to people? Or what would you recommend to those who are just trying to get it all built into their life in such a way that it's sustainable, not just for today or for this particular week, but sustainable going forward for hopefully years to come?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would emphasize to them is focusing on just trying to do the best you can at the beginning. And it's going to be more of a labor, and it's going to be more difficult, but it does become easier with time, or it becomes more kind of routine with time. So find things that are easy to cook, find things that go to Trader Joe's, find things that are easy to prepare, focus on figuring out where you need to be at calorically. And then, again, the creatine and the protein supplements will do a lot to help balance out your diet, because you want to find something that's satiating and it's easy to do a shake. I usually do 2-3 shakes a day during the fast, and then I just supplement it with carbs and fats that I can get from vegan sources. It's not great, but it's the fast. It's not supposed to be fun. It's what I find more than anything is, because I'm a creature of habit, is more than anything, the fast just becomes boring to eat. That's mostly what it is. It's just boring. It's just a lot of monotonous food. Like you eat rice, you eat whatever, you eat this, that, you get a protein shake with it. It's not fun. But therein lies the discipline. Is like you're training yourself to do things that you don't enjoy doing. And one of the things that I talk about on my channel that I think is extremely important is, when you're a boy, you do whatever you feel like doing. And when you become a man, you have to do the things that you're supposed to be doing. And that is one of the big disconnects today with our youth, is that they extend boyhood into the years where they need to be developing as a man, because all they want to do is whatever they want to do that's fun or enjoyable or whatever. They're not understanding that part of adulthood and manhood is, my mind is telling me to do this, but because I'm an adult and because I'm a man, I actually just need to do this. I need to control my behavior. So my desires may be over here, but my behavior is over here. I think the church is exceptional for teaching that with fasting. I think that's one of those fundamental things that starts to help you with physical control, especially in a culture that's hypersexualized, especially for young men, to show them, look, you don't have to do the things that your body is telling you to do, or that you're craving, or that your mind is telling you to do. You actually can exert, with God's help, self-discipline and begin to act in a way that is consistent with your values and the values that God is giving you, and not just with, oh, this is what I want to do today or what I'm craving to do. So in that way, I feel like fasting has innumerable value and importance for teaching self-control and self-restraint.
Now, you mentioned your channel. I think you were speaking about your YouTube channel. You also have an Instagram presence. Maybe something else that I'm not even aware of. I'm not particularly
Those are the main
technolog
ones. Yeah.
technologically savvy, but could you briefly just talk about your social media presence and what it is that you're working towards and achieving and hoping to achieve and how it's going?
Yeah, thank God. I'm very blessed with the reception that we've had. I think that we've obviously hit a nerve within culture, and we've been able to uh, reach a lot of people. The vast majority of viewers on my channel are not Orthodox at all. I mean, I'm not getting let's say a very good month, we're getting 1 million views. We're not getting 1 million views from Orthodox Christians. And the comment section, when you read it, is very clearly peppered with people who are not anything, and people who are Roman Catholic, and people who are Protestant. And I would almost think that if you probably did a demographic study, I would say that Orthodox may be the lowest segment of people who actually watch the channel. But it's funny because it's a lot of it is just practical advice from the Holy Fathers regarding a variety of topics. And I would say some of the biggest topics that I cover that have resonated with people are the topics regarding controlling your thoughts and really nepsis, watchfulness of your mind. There's nothing like that in Protestantism. And there's not, from what I can gather from comments on what, there's not a lot of that even in Roman Catholicism. It seems to be kind of a wholly unique Orthodox experience to understand the impact of intrusive thoughts and how they ruin your life. And it's a counter to modern psychology and the emotionalism that we see being pushed, that your life is not about your emotions. Your life is about controlling your thoughts and directing your thoughts towards God and using your mental energy to pray. So yeah, I would say I'm extremely blessed with how people have received it. I mean, even the other day we did a video on how can you tell if you're demon possessed, and we go through kind of the 4 classic categories that are kind of just generally talked about. And you have to kind of systemize things for YouTube because you can't just ramble on about nothing. You've got to kind of make it digestible. But in so doing, there's so many comments there that are like, man, I've never thought about this. I never looked at it that way, or I'm struggling with this, or I'm suffering from that, or I didn't acknowledge this, or I didn't know that this was demonic, et cetera, et cetera. So really, we're trying to do our best to educate people in a generalized sense. And then obviously our fundamental message is to push people towards the Orthodox Church, to show them, look, what the Orthodox has to offer is not an alternative. It's a unique path that is complete in and of itself. It's not a form of Christianity. It is Christianity. This is what the life of a Christian should look like. These are the tools that are available in the Orthodox Church. It is a complete hospital for the soul. So
now, if people were to connect with you and to learn more about what you're saying, where would they find your channel?
I think if they just go on YouTube, if you go on YouTube, I think if you just type in Father Moses and spell it out, I think I'm either maybe the top or second top hit that will come up. And then on Instagram is just my full name, Father Moses McPherson at Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah.
If they're looking for your church, if they want to actually become a catechumen or just stop by or attend or just inquire, where would they find your church?
Yeah, it's orthodoxaustin.com, and we're just basically up in Georgetown, which is the north side of Austin.
North side of Austin. How far are you from Pflugerville?
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Austin's kind of here, then there's Round Rock, and then there's Georgetown, and then Pflugerville's kind of over here to the east side of Austin.
Okay, I used to live in Texas. I mean, I lived there for a little while, so
cool.
I'm trying to put it all kind of on my mental map. Well, is there anything else that you think that maybe I should have asked and then I just didn't even think of it? Something that you think is important for people to hear, for people to know?
I would just say that the thing that I would emphasize that I feel like there's a lot of confusion about today is St. John Chrysostom, he says in his writings, he says, listen, there's not a different standard for monks and lay people because there's only one gospel. So all of us are called to love God with our whole heart. That is the fundamental aspect, is to cultivate the love of God in our hearts and to purify our hearts so that we're able to love and know him more deeply. Everything is about our intimacy with God. That being said, being a lay person is not being a monastic. It is not, you're not a married monastic. The life of a lay person is radically different. Raising children is radically different. Even as a lay person, you may have an idea of raising children, which all of us do, and are often judgmental of people who have children, and is a very humbling experience when you actually have to do it yourself. And I've only been doing it 13 years. Like, you know this better than I do, which is there are personalities and changes and temperaments. There's energy levels. There's all kinds of things. Each person is unique, and it's totally true of your own children. So what works for a monastic in a very kind of set discipline is not totally applicable. We should differentiate the rules from the principles. The principles of monasticism apply, but the rules of monasticism aren't exactly the same. And so, you know, if you're raising a bunch of sons and you need to be healthy, you need to be athletic, you need to be able to engage with them in what they're doing, their sports, their things that they're doing. You know, this doesn't mean that you need to be a world-class athlete or strive for that. I could certainly be better at powerlifting if I devoted more time and energy to it. But I don't have that, and I don't want that. It's a hobby. It's part of my life. But because we have sedentary jobs today, number one, for those who are older of sedentary jobs, look, having exercise is vitally important for your overall health and for your mental health, to sweat and to strive and to push towards something. And it is absolutely a witness to your family. And you are the one that's called to be the protector, the provider, the nurturer, all of those things to your family. So sometimes I see pushback online when I say this stuff, and I go, listen, it's not about becoming a quote unquote alpha male. It's about setting a healthy standard for being a normal Orthodox man, right? I mean, St. Paisios, he praises in his book his father, because his father was like essentially a tough man, but he was not a monk. And St. Paisios also goes on to say, look, doing extreme asceticism is not possible for a layman, because if you hurt your health, you're the one who provides for your family. If you fast too much or do whatever as a monk, he goes, it's no problem, because they just put you in the infirmary and the other monks take care of you. So it's a completely different situation. It doesn't mean that we're not ascetical. We're absolutely ascetical, but we have to have a tempered asceticism and understand that there's certain things in place that we need to do in our family. And then for young men, I would say especially, whether or not you're going to be a monk or a married person, physical exercise helps with sexual purity. It does, because it gets the energy out of your body. It depletes your energy. You need to do something that wears you out physically so that you're not, you know, kind of charged up all the time. So normally, if you were a young man, you would be working in the fields or in a shop or doing whatever. You would have a physically grueling day. Right now, at the peak of your hormones, you're sitting in class or you're going to college. These are not physically demanding activities at all. And your body needs to sweat. It needs to feel some pain. It needs to feel you need to push it mentally. So anything that you can do physically helps with your purity and helps with, you know, depleting the body a bit. And it keeps you more balanced. And that's the thing that I think is that, you know, there's so many people that are, I don't know, I think it's when you're reading the Holy Fathers, one of the things that I found when I first came to Orthodoxy that seems to be lost now today, and I remember this because I went to the monastery, St. Barbara's Monastery, and I talked to the nuns and I said, oh, I want to read, what theology book should I read? And they were like, oh, you're not at that level. Like you're not made for theology. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm a theology major, blah, 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 blah. They're like, no. You need to read books on how to like live and get along with other people, basically, and be humble and learn to bear your cross. And other, they were giving me principles that just went right over my head, because I thought, well, I'm basically a theologian. Everybody's a theologian in the Orthodox Church. And they were like telling me, like, you're not a theologian, And I see a lot of people coming to Orthodoxy. It's very, very intellectually based. And I'm not saying that we can't seek for answers from the Holy Fathers, but our faith is one of action. It's something that we live. St. Maximus, he wrote, his writings as a very advanced monastic, a lot of them. These were not texts that were written for, 22-year-old college students living in luxury. It's not the same thing. So the thing that I would emphasize is live your faith, bear your cross, be a servant at the church, be physically capable, do something, like be in action. Don't just sit around and read about Orthodoxy. Live Orthodoxy. If you want to live Orthodoxy, find a project at your church and do that project. The priest will be excited to give you projects to do. There's probably a door that needs to be hung. There's probably a painting project that needs to be done. Do something. Be active in your faith. That's the thing that I would say is that not that the church has overemphasized monasticism, but there's a large part of the church writings are for monastics. They're not really for lay people. There's principles in there, but we usually lack the discernment to apply them. And we go overboard. We have a tendency as people to kind of go overboard. And if you're going to go overboard in service to other people. Like, be somebody at the church that greets people, that serves in the altar, that does projects that you can rely on, etc., etc. Be a person of action. That is, yeah.
On that note, don't just read about Orthodoxy. Live Orthodoxy.
Live
and be a person of action. Be a person of service. That's I think that's probably the most important thing to remember. Father Moses, thank you so much for your time. This is
my
wonderful
pleasure.
conversation. I hope that all of us will. I know for myself, I will watch it several times to learn more and more, because there's just so much information in it, and I can't remember it all right now, but I will continue to learn more from our talk as I watch it again and again. Thank you so much, and may God multiply your ministry to the benefit of the people who are seeking orthodoxy and seeking answers and looking for role models too. And there should be a number of role models, and we have wonderful ones. And you, I believe, are a role model for a lot of young men who are looking for someone who shows them how to be a man of action. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. By your prayers, Father.